Hi, Biplab. Introduce myself again as Sundararajan, SharePoint MVP from India. Today I'm going to talk about the buzz around the SharePoint app model, the SharePoint 2013 app model. So, app is a very huge area, and it's very difficult to cover, in just 1 hour session. So I would like to do a very good level setting here. I would be, giving a conceptual overview of the app model and various different design choices available. This session will be mostly like level 200 or level 300 session, and I will be demonstrating a couple of scenarios. One scenario around a SharePoint hosted app, another scenario around a SharePoint hosted app which is done with PHP technology. So with that briefing, let me directly jump onto the first slide. Okay, so the key agenda, right? This slide will set the agenda for the talk. So we would understand what are the overview of the various 2013 SharePoint 2013 features and the new app model. What is the app architecture and what are the various benefits both from the technology side and as well as the business side. And we would briefly see what are the various design choices or design options when it comes with respect to building apps. And slowly we will actually cruise along the various app properties. I'll brief little bit of app authentication and app authorization. Then finally couple of demos, and then actually I'll take the questions. And if you feel that certain questions are very critical, which is blocking the navigation of the slides, you can interrupt me in between, and start sharing your questions. Otherwise, I would reserve the questions at the end of the session. So with that, we can move to the next slide. So pretty much this is again, kind of repetition of the previous slide where what is an app model actually? App model is a new development paradigm plus new hosting paradigm. It tries to solve a lot of the problems which is associated with the current SharePoint 2013 way of developing SharePoint specific customization. And that is just we can say a one-liner definition for an app model. And what is a SharePoint app? SharePoint app, again, this is pretty much aligned with the latest social trends and social concepts in the industry, and in which we can develop the apps not only restricted to the Microsoft technologies. We could develop the apps by leveraging the latest technology, things like HTML5, JavaScript, more of a client-side technologies, and as well as we could also go to the other non-Microsoft stack, things like PHP, Java, and all that. So we could leverage various technologies. The nutshell is, if the customer has different technology investment, at the same time they want those technology investments to be integrated to gel well with SharePoint, it is now feasible. Earlier we used to only develop the underscore layouts pages or application pages, but right now it is very much feasible with this new app model. And the benefits are really tremendous because it really takes out a lot of server-side execution of your SharePoint code. Hence, a lot of performance bottleneck and all that, because many a times, if a lot of people from Microsoft PFEs, the Premier Field Engineering Group, they really explain about what are the drawbacks of the server-side object model, how actually developers misuse it, and how it actually impacts the stability of the form. That is a critical thing actually. The product team, they have come up with this app model, which is very interesting. We can see it in the next slide. Design choices, as we said, we have three choices. One is completely on server stack, server-side technology. The other is on client side. And third option is actually a hybrid of everything. So with that, actually, we'll move to the next slide. Okay. The whole idea of this slide, where we want to understand is what are the customization options available to us, right? So again, right, SharePoint is not a monolithic product, as we all know. So it's again a layer product which is built using a layered architecture like a UI, business, and data layer, and it presented a lot of scope for customization and extension point at pretty much every layer, right? In UI, we had the chance to, customize web parts, develop, visual web parts or non-visual web parts, delegate controls, user controls, And when it comes to business process, we had the option of doing event handlers, BCS kind of business data model, and at the data layer as well, we had a lot more options. So all these were fine because if you are doing a lot of SharePoint development for a long time, you know a common problem. Whatever options you are doing till SharePoint 2010, most of the customizations had to depend on the server-side object model, which in turn had to leverage SP site and SP web objects, which is technically not 100% pure managed code, right? As you all know. So it has a little bit of unmanaged code, and SP site and SP web, they are just managed wrappers around the unmanaged code. So if we don't dispose the objects properly, and there is a very, very high actually chance for all the errors, memory leaks, instability issues for IAS. Briefly it was bringing down the forms and all that, SharePoint forms. So this is the briefing on the actually current customization options are available to us. I think there is a question for someone. Let me take that one. Someone was asking a question.
No worries, Sundar. I'll just take care of that.
Okay. And with that we can move to the next slide. Okay. The customization challenges, right? As we all know, one is the platform stability, which we explained earlier, the improper use of SP site and SP web objects, and one of the things which are frequently seen as if it doesn't, how it gets stability, right? Your IAS app tools actually it gets reset frequently without a predictable way actually. That again internally SP site and SP web, it holds a lot of database connections. If you don't dispose it properly, it keeps a lot of unclosed or open database connection, which is a very costly resource. And other impact, from the practical point of view, what I can say is the platform upgrade issues. Basically, upgrade is a key, very, very painful area in SharePoint when it comes to SharePoint, because we all know that, how difficult it was to migrate from 2007 to 2010 and 2020, 2013. So we don't have a single click, upgrade, or just like an option where you upgrade an Office software or a Visual Studio. It's very painful, you have to wear the hat of both the IT pro and as well as the developer actually, and as well as little bit of the hat on the customization side to make the upgrade happen. So and the more amount of custom code you have, the custom code meaning the server-side code, your upgrade, more difficult it is. Again, a developer skill set, because till SharePoint 2010, SharePoint was kind of a closed ecosystem. People need to know a lot of SharePoint specific objects, or even .NET coding actually to make the all the SharePoint customizations. So this actually sets the nice background of briefing for why we need an app model, because we have stated all the problems, but let's see actually in the forthcoming slides how actually the app model really addresses all the 4 set problems. Okay, the brief thing, right? The key differentiator in the app model is the SharePoint application, basically your app, right? Our app that need not no longer live inside the SharePoint. Basically, it need not execute actually the core or the crux of the app components, all the customizations that we do need not get executed inside the SharePoint WFEs or IAS. It doesn't need to consume those process memory and all that. So the whole idea is that actually it takes the execution out of SharePoint server, and either you bring in your own environment in the form of your own server farms or data centers, or we rely on actually Windows Azure as a cloud platform, or any other industry compatible the cloud services to host all these apps. And the custom codes actually, the other key thumb rule, like what we can say about the app is, generally speaking, puristic SharePoint apps can only have client-side code. Your HTML and the client object model or the JavaScript. In a puristic sense, we cannot have a server-side code. Even if you try to manipulate or go around the Visual Studio, try to inject your server-side code for the app project in Visual Studio, it is not allowed. I think the specific reason the product team has blocked it. When we start playing around, we'll understand that. That is the actually nuances of one of the nuances of a puristic SharePoint app project. But technically speaking, there is nothing preventing you from doing the server-side code, actually using server's code, but it is not in a pure SharePoint hosted model. There are a couple of other models, which is actually the cloud hosted model or the provider hosted model, where we could even leverage ASP.NET MVC or Java JTU technology to use the server-side code, build all the APIs. But in that case, the remote web will be running in a different server farm or a cloud, but app will be just a wrapper or kind of an iframe to that, and that's how it will be hosted. Again, the interesting thing, because apps actually, we need to understand how app authentication and authorization will happen. So one of the key takeaway we need to understand, SharePoint apps no more rely on the claims authentication or the SAML tokens. Okay, to get into the SharePoint, basically, if you want to log into SharePoint, right, that scenario we still need a claims authentication or SAML. That is no more changed. In fact, in SharePoint 2013, default is claims, but if you want, actually, you can switch back to the old classic. That has never changed. But the SharePoint only authenticates users. SharePoint doesn't authenticate or authorize apps. So, I mean, Microsoft is bringing in the beautiful concept OAuth, actually, an open authentication protocol that's used for the authentication and authorization of apps. Again, apps can communicate, puristic SharePoint apps can communicate to SharePoint either through a REST endpoints, because if you look at SharePoint 2013 product, it's a very powerful one. It has got a lot of REST enablement. Most of the functionalities, the list functionalities, the CRUD operations, everything is REST enabled. You could just invoke those REST endpoints using HTTP GET or put, plain whole HTTP request either from the JavaScript or any other code. You could still get that one, or the CSOM, the client-side object model. So this is pretty much the under-hood plumbing, the methodology for app. At a high level, right, we are talking about app. So there should be some place where all these apps, like Windows Marketplace apps or Windows Store apps or any other like Android apps, we have a common place, like App Store or Play Store kind of thing. Similar to that, we have, a repository, what we call it as Marketplace. You could have three levels. One is a corporate marketplace, and you need to go to central admin in SharePoint, set up all the necessary things to define a corporate marketplace. Public marketplace is something which is available in office.com, and you can use PowerShells for controlling the lifecycle of apps, or you could even use the APIs, the inbuilt APIs to control the lifecycle apps. So this just sets the context for the app model. So slowly in the next slides we will see, we'll slowly dive into the details how each apps is categorized. So with that, we can move to the next slide. Okay, the simple definition, right? I mean, in Visual Studio, when you create an app project, there are three projects. One is SharePoint hosted or auto hosted or provider hosted. Whatever we create, it creates. Typically, what it does is actually it will create most of the times, for a provider hosted project and an auto hosted project, it will create two project types in a solution. One is your app project, actual app project, and other is it will create an app web. So the app web project actually really gives the flexibility or power for us to take that app web, start page, host it in a remote place like a remote data center or maybe in Windows Azure. But mostly in SharePoint hosted apps, we have only one project, so the app project. Which means the app web of the project which will execute within the SharePoint host. So let me get into the details. What is the app web or what is the host web in detail? At a high level, we can understand there are three project types. When we create in Visual Studio, we'll have all these things. And when it compiles and then when we package it, an app actually gets packaged into an app extension file, which is kind of analogous, to the way the SharePoint server side, solutions were packaged in 2010, like WSP. Again, conceptually, it's going to have a manifest, because manifest is the brain of the entire component. That will have all the data config which will point, and it will have a solution.WSP which will have a pre-features. And if you look at the underlying thing, it still uses the solution and the features framework, and it can have other files. For example, if you are doing a SharePoint hosted app, the app can have a list definition. It can have a custom page. It can have custom JavaScript. So those kind of things it can have additionally. So this is actually, it's again a unit of deployment or unit of, you can call it as a unit of an application isolation. So we can move to the next slide. Okay. Let's slowly get into the app architecture. So again, right, the app can be, I mean, we can design the app not in a monolithic manner, because nowadays we no more design any application in any technology in a monolithic way. So we always go for a layered architecture. So UI, business, and data. So splitting that, I mean, if you look at the app model, the UI is actually a wrapper for what the business component as well as the data layer. So UI actually, I mean, when it comes to UI of the app, you could have an app part, which I will get into it in detail, or you could have a full-paged app or an immersed app. I mean, those are the options for UI. But when you get into the business logic, we can still have the business logic, inside the same app project, which is actually a SharePoint hosted. If you want, for the purpose of scaling and hosting, we can also host it in other external, providers like a server farm or, Windows Azure. Again, the data layer, data could be, it can do CRUD operations, create, read, update, delete, or interface with SharePoint objects, or it could even talk to a SQL server, and maybe an ASP.NET MVC or a SQL combination, like the auto-hosted or Azure-hosted apps. So we can move to the next slide. So as we said, right, this slide actually, illustrates, I mean, how the challenges, what we said in the SharePoint 2010 server-side customizations or the custom solution, how the challenges gets transformed into the real benefits. So one is, right, definitely the platform stability increases. I'll get into it later, why, with a lot of details in the coming slides. And the upgrade becomes a lot easier, because most of the time your app manifest or app definitions and little bit of metadata only lives in SharePoint. Most of the time, a lot of executing code, will be outside of SharePoint. We have a centralized marketplace, where which acts as a governing mechanism to control all these custom components, who can install it, which department within a company or even in a public space, and how many times one can install and all that. We could even block it based on users, groups, roles, and permission. The manageability of custom component, we have a centralized governing place and all that. And which this model makes the SharePoint custom development slowly inclined and ready for the cloud enablement. And additional nuances, the introduction of OAuth, I'll get into it later, and as well as the app permissions and block cross-site scripting. App permissions is a very, very interesting thing, because in past, till 2010, we wanted, let's say this scenario, we wanted a custom component, let's say like a web part or an application page, to act on behalf of users. Now, I want to delegate something to a component. It should have a concept of, delegation of identities, but in 2010, we are not able to achieve that. But in 2013, we have with the OAuth and as well as the new app permission matrix. Now, actually, we can have apps which can get delegation and do work on behalf of users. For example, let's say as a user, I may not have access to do certain actions, but the app I really download that may have an elevated permissions to make certain actions. And as long as my company administrator trusts that app to be installed on my SharePoint site, I can still go ahead and install it. So which will still enable me to do little higher privileged operations, which I may not have usually as a reader permission or something like that. So this is very, very interesting thing, and this again app model presents a scenario for cross-site scripting. So let's understand how it avoids cross-site scripting slowly later. So I can move to the next slide. Okay, at a high level, as we discussed, app model, we need to dissect that into three things. One is the development model, other is the security model, and infrastructure. So when it comes to development model, first is what are the development tools I'm going to use, because options available to us are plenty, because we can use Visual Studio, or I could still develop an app in a different technology, maybe WebSphere or those kind of technologies. So that is still available. And the interesting thing is we have a new development tool, Napa. Napa is actually a kind of app. Actually, it is a webified or web-enabled version of Visual Studio. We can say a trimmed down version of Visual Studio, which is available in the cloud space in Office 365. You can go there. You may not even need to have Visual Studio. You go to Napa, install the Napa app onto your, SharePoint Office 365 development tenant and start developing a SharePoint app using just the HTML and as well as the JavaScript. So that is an interesting model available to us. Security, again, we can define three policies: app only, user only, and as well as app and user both. It is the authorization paradigm, and then we also have an interesting OAuth model, which I'll explain a little later. Infrastructure, again, this comes to hosting, where I want to host, whether it's on-premise or Azure or as well as my provider served the data forms. So this actually gives a lot more flexibility and benefits for us in terms of technology stack, the security model. It depends on the, again, business requirement, the scenarios, what we are addressing. So let's move to the next slide. So I think we are moving at a little slow pace, so probably we'll wrap it up. So this one also we could skip because I covered in the earlier slide, hosting, UI, scoping. So hosting is a key concept, but one of the things I would want to do is scoping. So we can scope the app at either a web level, SharePoint web level, or we can even host the app at a tenant. I mean, by now actually around a lot of hype around the cloud. I hope everyone will be aware about multi-tenancy, like multi-tenancy. That's a key buzzword actually. I mean, in SharePoint 2010 itself, it started supporting multi-tenancy. And I mean, you can think of tenant or a tenancy as a unit of, again, an application isolation in the world of cloud. I mean, that application isolation has to deal with the data isolation, service isolation, a lot of things. But beautifully, because SharePoint provides all that, multi-tenancy, a lot of isolation. The Office 365, if you go to SharePoint Online, that itself is a real-world example of multi-tenancy. So again, that plays a key role in scoping, how you want to, where this app needs to be hosted and how much of resources it needs to access. Is it only within the current web, or is it going to access outside of the current web and go to the other actually webs and other tenants? And UI and entry points is also a key thing. Sometimes you could have this as a kind of a widget or a web part, or it could be like even a full-blown page or an immersive page. So we can move to the next slide. Okay. So, I mean, let's not spend too much time on reading this slide, but let's understand the key, differences when we really go for SharePoint hosted apps. I mean, usually SharePoint hosted apps are preferred for, smaller apps and which doesn't have any server-side code. Very lightweight app, things like you could have an insurance premium calculator, or maybe a claims calculator, or maybe an app, that can upload pictures or photos into all the public, all the social platforms and all that. If you have that kind of a very, very lightweight scenarios, you could go for SharePoint hosted apps. The beauty of it is because in Office 365, we get all the necessary configuration in terms of, infrastructure, in terms of the dedicated DNS entries for apps, everything, the OAuth, all those things enabled. But if you want to do a SharePoint hosted apps on-premise, we have to do a lot more configuration by ourselves, which is little actually tedious and takes extra steps. But cloud hosted apps actually, if you want to develop little complex apps, for example, let's say you want to have an app, actually kind of a timesheet app, and that needs to integrate with the backend systems, the line of business, Siebel, CRM, those kind of things, as well as it needs to integrate with other services within your company. And it usually doesn't make, because it's going to take, if you host this code in SharePoint form, it's going to take a lot of, server-side resources. In such kind of scenarios, it makes sense for us to think of a cloud hosted, either an Azure auto-hosted, because in auto-hosted model, behind the scenes, it will be pushing all the apps, and the only option there is actually you get an ASP.NET MVC3 with a SQL actually Azure instance. It pushes there, and then we could host all the logic. And if you want complete flexibility, we want to develop the app in any arbitrary technology like Java or PHP, that is also available, but you need to develop that as a provider hosted apps, and then that needs to be configured accordingly. So under cloud hosted, we have two things. One is auto, and as well as the provider hosted apps. Let's move to the next slide. As I said earlier, app user experience. I mean, again, any technology paradigm or any product feature is not successful without a proper user experience, right? So I mean, as we all know, Microsoft is very good for user experience, in terms of Windows 7 or Windows phones and all that. Similar way, app model presents a lot more options for user experience, extensibility as well. So immersive apps actually usually a full page app, which actually immerses on your actually page where you access it. That is actually the default one. A part app is something actually like you have developed an app, something like a weather app or like a stock ticker, very minute, lightweight app, but you want to render that. You have an option, basically, we can create that as a app part, similar to a widget or other part, then host that one. Extension app, this is an interesting thing. Apps doesn't necessarily, target only the custom UI and all that. It can even aim to enhance or to provide extension to the, standard ribbon, SharePoint ribbon items or the menu items. For example, if you want to have a custom ribbon item which can launch a print service or some external, things, external your business provider or business partner service. I mean, the idea is we can also develop extension points to ribbon and as well as the standard ECB menus in SharePoint. Those are called as extension apps. So at a high level, these are the three things, but in today's demo, I'll be little bit, touching about the immersive app and as well as the part app. So with that briefing, we can move to the next slide. I mean, this one we covered earlier, app scoping, web scope, and tenant scopes. I mean, usually, for simple apps, anything that needs access only within the current web and as well as its parent site collection, we can go for a web app. But let's say we want to query across site collections or maybe leverage certain shared services like a search or a DCS, we could go for a tenancy scoped app or tenant scoped apps. All these options are available in Visual Studio project templates, and then we actually develop the apps. I'll quickly get onto it in a little while. There we can set the scope and what are the permissions we want to set and all those things. So we can move to the next slide. So app properties, okay, this is very interesting. We need to, like any other project type, we need to provide a title, name, and as well as start page. Start page is very interesting because the start page of the app actually plays a key role. I mean, the resources, the URI of the start page where the web file is found, that will be rendered when your app is rendered. Again, this start page actually signifies where your actual app logic is hosted. For example, most of the times for SharePoint hosted apps, this start page will live within the /pages/client webpart.aspx. And if it is a provider hosted or an auto hosted, most of the time this start page of the app will live outside of SharePoint site collection or the app web. It will be in the external server. And the other important parameter is URL parameters. So by default, it will have scanner tokens. We need to leave scanner tokens as it is because this parameter really does the underground plumbing or the wiring between your app web and as well as your host web. Because in provider and cloud hosted scenarios, actually, the start page of the app will be rendered or executed or running, in a different server, in a provider server or in a cloud. But it doesn't understand, from where this request is coming, how am I going to serve actually, and all that. So that actually the standard tokens acts as a bridge between the caller and as well as the start page of the app. So let's briefly understand what is passed in the standard tokens. At a high level, 3 or 4 parameters are passed. One is the app web URL, other is your host web URL, and as well as actually the calling page URL and the access token, which if at all an access token is there, that is as well as passed in the standard tokens. So let's park it here for now and understand what is an app web and what is a host web. So, I mean, most of the times, for a SharePoint app, the host web is actually a site collection. That is a container for under which an app is created. So whenever we create an app and install an app, either SharePoint hosted or auto hosted or provider hosted, once an app is installed, it will create a subsite. So this is what is happening. It will create a subsite within the site collection, and it will get a SP web by itself. Each app will get a unique SP web by itself, and that SP web is called as app web, which is a a closed unit of isolation for the app. But we will have host web. Host web is actually most of the time it's your site collection that actually provides a hosting container for the app. So by default, any app will have only permissions to access the resources within the app web. Basically a list or a library or anything within that app web. It cannot even reach out to host web. We need to provide explicit permissions, for example, to reach to host web or the site collection resources and all that, or even access the user profile service or search. We need to provide the necessary permissions. And one of the interesting things is each app will have its own fully qualified DNS or domain name, and than your host name. I mean, host may have a different domain, and the app web will have a fully qualified distinct domain name, and that presents a very interesting problem, cross-site scripting. Let's see, what the cross-site scripting in the coming slides. So with that, I think we can move to the next slide.
Sundar, there is a question on multi-tenancy in SharePoint.
Yeah, definitely, I'll explain that. So, for example, right, I think the question is from Ashish. So multi-tenancy, right, multi-tenancy came into picture when SharePoint as a product needs to be cloud enabled. For example, right, a tenant, most of the times, right, your tenant is a site collection, right? Let's say you have a company A and a company B. Maybe the classic example, you have a Coca-Cola and Pepsi, right? Pepsi, let's say they go to Microsoft, they provide SharePoint Online, Office 365, right? And they want to host their portals, maybe an intranet or internet facing, whatever maybe. And interestingly, cloud, right? Different distinct customers' data, they live in the same container or same hardware, right? So there has to be some mechanism either from the hardware as well as the software configuration to provide a level of isolation for both data and as well as services. In this case, if you look at Pepsi may get a site collection, Coca-Cola may get a different site collection for their sites. But internally, right, based on the plan, the cloud plan, based on the severity and sensitivity of the data, the way it will be implemented is the data level isolation. Maybe Pepsi's data will be implemented in a separate content database. Coca-Cola's data will be implemented in a separate content database. Briefly, explaining, tenancy is actually a concept where how we provide a level of isolation or level of application isolation or level of data or service isolation when multiple customers wants to host their application in a hosted environment where everything is shared. And there are a lot of concepts how we can segregate the data, how, for example, search, DCS and all certain services, it can be shared across tenants. Certain services cannot be shared across tenants. That has restrictions. It is a very big area. I'm just, considering the interest of time. I'm just briefly explaining that. I hope this clarifies the question. Okay. With that, actually, I'll just proceed, to the next question. I'll just proceed to the next. We can proceed to the next slide. The client web part is an important setting. Most of the time, it will have a client web part in the standard tokens, and this needs to be left, by default as it is if we don't any changes. Let's move to the next settings. Next slide. Okay. When it comes to the permissions for the apps, so we have got a lot of permission levels. If you look at the access levels, we can define read, write, update, delete, those kind of operations for an app, and as well as the permissions. I could also first I can define the scope. I can say tenant, site collection, web, or a list, and then based on that, actually, I can say read, write, or delete, and then actually these are the permissions which are available in the app management configuration section in the SharePoint 2013 site collection. At the same time, you can set the same permissions when you create the apps using Visual Studio. We'll quickly get on there and see that. So we can move to the next slide. Okay, at a high level, there are 4 permissions: read only, write, manage, and full control. So it depends on the apps actually. So app, what it needs to do. So most of the time, it is not recommended to go for a full control. You don't know who's going to use the app and what kind of permissions they're going to do. Always start with the basic minimum permissions, and the way the app permission model works is it uses the LCD, like lowest common denominator, and it has a nice matrix. It evaluates whether a user has a permission and an app has a permission, and it tries to figure out that applies an LCD rule and then authorizes necessary actions to be done on SharePoint. But at a high level, it has got 4 or 5 standard permissions, but it's recommended to start with the minimum required permission and slowly start increasing it whenever required. So we'll move to the next slide, considering the interest of time. Okay, this is again, right, anything has got a limitation. Any new advancement, slowly it will be addressed in the next releases. So the limitations at this point of time, right, there are certain SharePoint 2010 server-side customizations that cannot be addressed as apps as of now. Another thing I could see is site definitions or site templates that cannot be addressed as or developed as an app. Delegate controls, when we use it typically in SharePoint branding scenarios, that cannot be addressed. Teams, other actually action groups and custom actions, and the user controls. Those are the things that cannot be addressed as apps right now, because there are a lot of reasoning behind that. So, for example, user controls, because it needs access on file system, it needs to go to file system. That's one of the reasons. Right now, user controls cannot get into a puristic SharePoint app right now. Maybe in future, we might expect a lot of improvements from Microsoft around that. But at this point of time, these are a little bit of limitations. Let's go to the next slide. That will also present certain other things. As I said earlier, right, I'll just show this slide, just park it and then show a demo. So the app client-side pattern, right, we saw host web, we saw app web, right, and one of the patterns is client-side pattern, where we develop everything using HTML and JavaScript, like Windows Store apps or maybe a phone apps. The app web, which is a subsite, technically a SP web, and that will be under your host web. Most of the time it's a site collection. And by default, app web will have access only to the resources within that subsite. If it needs to reach even outside of that, talk to a parent, it needs to elevate. And we don't have directly the concept of like run with elevated privileges, how we had in SharePoint 2010. There is something little closer to that, but we don't directly have a kind of impersonation running with elevation. So I just park it here, slowly go to a demo, and then I'll share my screen, I'll show an app, and then show a demo. Maybe guys, are you able to see my screen, everyone?
It is just loading. By the time your screen loads, I'll just answer one question which came up, one question and answer. So can we get the slides? Actually, the slides are available in the handout section. So if you see, there are 3 textbook or notepad icons on the live meeting. So if you just click on that, you will see a separate window. From there, you can download the slides. Sundar, desktop didn't share.
Yes, Biplav, it's loading. Are you able to see the screen?
It's coming up and then vanishes again. Are you using multiple desktops, like extended desktop and all?
No. I'm just using Office 365. I'm not using multiple. Let me see. Let me flip to that one. Are you able to guys see this one actually right now?
Yeah.
Studio?
Yes.
Okay. I think we're considering the interest of time, because I had 2 demos, but I'll only show the interesting and a very little complex demo. And then maybe in future, in future revenues, I'll conduct dedicated sessions on all these 3 app models. So this is a SharePoint hosted app, but I've created it in an interesting way. I'm not trying to actually only live within SharePoint. The way I'm doing this, okay, I have this app. I have an announcement, basically, I mean, as I said earlier, in a SharePoint hosted app, it can have a list, libraries, whatnot, all the SharePoint objects within that app set. So I've created an announcement while creating the project, created an announcement list with a couple of sample items, and as well as I've created another list, custom list, like a sales report. And when it's like again list definition, everything design support is very, very simple. You can go there, create a list instance, custom list, add the records, sample records. But that is actually not the, the intent of the demo. I mean, here what we're saying is we have SharePoint resources in terms of a couple of custom lists. What we're trying to do is this is a SharePoint app, but interestingly what I've done is I have the start page of the app. I can show you. I can go to the app manifest and show you. My start page of the app actually is not in SharePoint. What I've done is I've created a PHP site. I've developed a couple of PHP pages, completely different PHP technology, bunch of native HTML and JavaScript inside the PHP. I've hosted that in Windows Azure as an Azure website, right? So as I said earlier, right, even in a SharePoint hosted app, we have the flexibility where we can point the start page not to other than SharePoint anywhere. As long as you plumb them or you stitch them together, they understand that it's fine. Just see my hosting type is SharePoint. Tokens are standard tokens. It will pass the necessary thing, my app web, my host web, and other required and necessary information to the start page, PHP page, which is going to execute in Azure, right? Usually a puristic SharePoint app, what we do is your start page will live under the pages library, maybe a default.aspx or a custom aspx where we write bunch of logic using HTML and JavaScript. It will try to most of the time try to access the data within SharePoint or maybe reach out to the external sources, right? So in this case, what I've done is, on the PHP side, I'm just using plain JavaScript and client-side object model and directly talking to SharePoint. And you can also see what are the permissions. I spoke about various permissions. So in this case, I've given a site collection read so that it doesn't have any permission issues in reading. And it also has, if you want to configure prerequisites, you can configure, which will install the required prerequisite. If you want to add a remote endpoint, that remote endpoint will have an access to access the app resources. So while I speak, right, what I do is actually, I can just hit F5, the app will get, deployed to Office 365. I have a developer tenant or a development tenant in Office 365. It will go, it will deploy the app, and I'll just quickly show how it gets rendered. So what the app will do is the app will surface this PHP page running in Azure, and then that will make a client-side call, basically a REST call to my SharePoint app web and do all the things. And so this is one of the possibilities. And it presents, as I said earlier, right, it presents an interesting scenario for cross-site scripting because your app start page is going to be in a different domain. In this case, it's in azure.websites.net, but my app web domain is .sharepoint.com. So the way actually how it is done is, Microsoft has done very interesting thing in the app framework. What they do is they have a component which a kind of app proxy.aspx inside an app web, which tries to marshal all these cross domain calls in a native actually iframe technology, and that actually enables the cross domain calls to be transported. So as I speak, what I do is my Office 365 developer
Sundar?
tenant has.
Sorry, your screen is not visible anymore.
Yeah, I'm sharing.
Okay.
Right, I think I'm just sharing your screen. I'm sharing my screen where I enter the Office 365 credentials.
Okay. Cool.
Like, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, it is visible.
I'm just typing, the user credentials for my development talent. So it's asking me, whether I trust the app. So are you seeing this trust screen, guys? So it's asking me whether I need to trust this app. And one moment. So it's asking me whether I need to trust this app. I just say trust it. And so right now you can see a PHP page. Now I've just enabled the tracing in PHP in Azure. So what it does is, this is a page, and you can see a client side scripting. You can see announcement number 1 and number 2. What it does is, this is actually a JavaScript which is getting executed on the Azure side. That is the start page of the app, or the actual, the business logic that handshakes with SharePoint and then does the required action. But if you look at, if you examine the query string parameters, I spoke about the importance of standard tokens, when in one of the slides, or again in the screen when we saw in the app configuration. This is the importance of the standard tokens. Basically, it passes the host web, the app web, and as well as the page from where the request is originated. Based on this, it figures out from where the call is coming, whether I can trust that and all that. So this is a very, very simple example, to show you how you can develop an app, even in a different technology. So now I will move back to the slides. I'm just moving back to slides. Biplab, could you share the slides?
Oh, the slides are visible. We'll just switch to the next one. Do you want to switch to the next one?
Okay, fine. Yeah, fine, actually. Yeah, fine. We can go just 5 more minutes, 6 more minutes. We'll go to the next slide. Slide number 21. We can move.
Yep. Done.
App design trends. Again, this comes into picture when you really want to do app which has got a lot of business processes. A little bit of, we can say, heavyweight apps. The natural choices, if you're going to use Microsoft Stack, ASP.NET, MVC, and Azure, you can go for auto-hosted apps. Or you're going to bring your own servers, maybe Java. You can even do the app in LAMP stack, Linux, Apache, MySQL, everything. That is a complete server-side stack. But the only thing is we need to establish the necessary infrastructure in terms of all the configuration required for OAuth, everything in the SharePoint form, as well as the required configuration at the app hosted server side, so that these two technologies can be married together. So the possibilities are endless. You could mix and match. You can also have, apps done using hybrid design patterns. So we'll move to the next slide. So this is the one I spoke about, cross-domain. In any app model in SharePoint, it presents an interesting, the classic age-old cross-site scriptings. So the way it does is, when we configure app as well, in the configuration section in the XML, we need to, there is a particular switch we need to enable so that it can trust the cross-domain calls. That switch needs to be enabled. On top of that, this is how it works in the underlying framework side. On the app management framework side, for every app web, it has an app web proxy.aspx, and that takes care of the underlying marshalling of all the calls wrapped inside an iframe, which actually safely, makes this different domain handshakes possible. This is a conceptual understanding of how it happens. So we can move to the next slide. I believe there are a couple of questions. Yeah, no problem. This is an interesting thing, guys, you need to understand. So, all these apps, these are again came into picture to cope up with the social wave, right? You have apps for a lot of phone, different Android, all the platforms, iPhone, Microsoft, Windows Phone. Again, you have the apps for everything, right? Facebook, everything. So I'll get into, again, I'll try to narrate, I'll I'll tell you a Facebook story, try to narrate how the OAuth scenario kind of matches with how a real world Facebook or a Twitter, kind of thing. But this slide is very interesting. We have three policies: user only, app policy, and user and app. So what app tries to solve the important problem is, we wanted a mechanism where we want to have a delegation for a piece of code in SharePoint in 2010. I want a piece of code that needs to run on behalf of user, right? Whether the user has certain things, he has the permissions to do or not, it has to do those kind of things. So that is right now possible. Three policies: app only policy, right? It is very risky, I would say, app only policy. Basically, right, if the app has permissions to make some action on a SharePoint resources, basically any changes back to the content database, it will still succeed even the user doesn't have a permission, right? That's very interesting. So sometimes I may have a reader permission, very low privileges, but my app which I've installed may have the higher privileges. But the company administrator, they need to make sure such kind of, they need to really evaluate the app before opening that to the public or or the users within the company. User only policy, right? It is very interesting because as a user, if I have permissions to handshake with certain resources, it will still allow me even the app doesn't have, right? When I install the app, it will ask me to trust it even if it doesn't trust. If as a user, if I have it, that can do. This is useful for certain scenarios, but I would say the recommended way is where you enable both the user only and as well as the app only, actually, which has got very, very good tight security. And we'll move to the next slide. I think, we are kind of 4 slides down. At a high level, because just, we have 1 more minute, I'll try to finish it in 2 minutes. Just quickly run through. We have four cons, OAuth is actually, is used or is needed only for authentication and authorization of apps. OAuth is not for user authentication. So at a high level, we have 4 entities: content server, client app, user, and the authentication ACS server. So you could relate to the real world scenario. The content server could be Facebook, and auth server ACS, again, Facebook has a trusted, token issuer and ACS kind of thing. Client app could be like a birthday app or maybe like a buddy app in Facebook. User again accesses it from a desktop. So at a high level, right, first initial steps, user hits the content server, SharePoint or Facebook. SharePoint or Facebook still authenticates the user, still authorizes the user. It has still the control, right? User gets authenticated and authorized the content server, either SharePoint or Facebook. The next step is we have an app. We are trying to launch that, do some permissions. Now, the app will talk to the trusted ACS or token provider. And here in this handshake, actually, 2 tokens. One is a context token, other is a refresh token. Context token is a short-lived token. The refresh token is a long-lived token. It can even live for months or years, right? So as soon as I get a context token through my app, then I need to pass it back to my content server. From then on, actually, the trusted ACS is actually disconnected. From then on, my app can directly talk to the content server, similar to your birthday app or a buddy app in a Facebook. Once you get a refresh token, app will directly talk to Facebook. Facebook will understand that. Similar way, SharePoint also will trust because it has got the trusted token from a trusted issuer. It's a high level. These tokens, app tokens, are not SAML tokens. This is something JWT tokens. We can see that in detail in a later section. This is a high level analogy of an app model, right? So we'll move to the next couple of more. I think we'll move to the next slide. Just 2 more remaining. So app, again, right, any framework which has got always a soft limits as well as a hard limit, right? So app, key limits which we need to understand on a day-to-day basis, right? App size, 100 MB, because size impacts us for a day-to-day app, deployment operations. And again, the number of licenses per tenant, right? You've got a license of about 1 million, but this really impacts us if you're a hoster or you're in a hosting scenario, or maybe you're a large company, you're a corporate marketplace, and like a lot of people are accessing it. These limits actually comes into picture. We move to the next slide. The key constraints, okay, as I said earlier, apps doesn't work with SAML. It uses its own, token standards, JWT tokens, which is again, which is tuned by, developed or tuned, customized by the SharePoint product team. We have got a dedicated app catalog, the entire app management service in central admin, and separate, management and governance part that manages the life cycle of apps. One of the interesting thing, if you're hosting your SharePoint portals in a multi-zone scenario, apps doesn't support work in a multi-zone, like a default zone, intranet or internet. It doesn't work on that. It only works on the single zone as of now. So I think with that, having said with that briefing, I'll complete my talk. Just move to the thank you slide, and I'd like to thank people for providing an opportunity and people who patiently listened on the line. Thanks everyone for joining.
Great. Thanks, Sundar, for the session. I think the question and answer panel is open, so if you guys have any questions, feel free to use that and ask your questions to Sundar. And by the time you are posting your questions, just keep in mind that your slide deck is available in the handout section. And I'll put up a quick poll just to get some comments from you guys. How do you like the content today? Did you like it? Was it informative? Do you agree to that, strongly agree to that? Or if you have any other feedback, to let us know. Yeah, question and answer panel is open. Sundar is available to let us know. Ashish has given a feedback on question and answer, so that's for you, Sundar. Thanks a lot. Awesome. Great. So thanks everyone for joining the session. And if you have any other questions, feel free to post it on question and answer panel. I think we can keep the question and answer panel open for another 5 minutes. Otherwise, if you are rushing to join the next session on SharePoint OAuth, I think the session has just started, so you can just jump into the next session. And in the meantime, Sundar, if you want to take up the next question from Ashish, he just posted that there.
Thanks for your question. I think there are a bunch of certifications available for 2013, both for developers and IT Pro. It's already announced, available in the Microsoft site. And if you can share me your email ID, or maybe I can get it from Viplav. I can share those links where you can get all the details for 2013 certifications.
Oh, I think he can reach out to you via Twitter, right? I think you mentioned your Twitter handle there on the slide, so I'll just put up that.
Twitter, and as well as my talk post is there, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so reach out to Sundar directly if you have any questions, and I'm sure he will be happy to assist you on that. I think there are some deeper engagement plans in SharePoint, so probably you could be one of the resources who can help us with whatever the deeper engagements we have in SharePoint.
Yeah, definitely, Viplav.
Awesome. If there are no other questions, thanks a lot once again for joining the session, and hope to see you in the next session. And thank you, Sundar, for delivering the awesome session and the demo.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Viplav. Thanks a lot.
Sure. Have a nice day ahead.
Thanks.